Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we got a great show for you guys today. First and foremost, we are going to dive into all angles of yesterday's Philip Tomasino trade, what it means for Tomasino, what it means for the Penguins lineup, and what it means for a young Pittsburgh Penguin who was sent back to Wilkes-Barre as a result of this move. And then we'll jump into, well, the Penguins' offensive woes in November because it's reaching a new low when it comes to goal scoring for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And we'll close things out with a discussion about where the Pens stand and should they go somewhere from here. Where is that somewhere? Let's get started. We're kicking things off with the Philip Tomasino trade. Big news that came down yesterday from the Pittsburgh Penguins. They acquired forward Philip Tomasino for a 2027 fourth round pick, which is actually the pick that the Pens acquired originally from the New York Rangers in the Chad Ruhwedel trade. So a little bit of maneuvering here from Kyle Dubas to bring in a 23-year-old former 24th overall pick. Horwat, what were your thoughts on the Penguins acquiring another first-round reclamation project?
Another first-round reclamation project is all I thought of it as. It didn't feel like a needle mover. It didn't feel like the kind of trade that's going to make the waves in quite a few things. I mean, we've been begging this team to do something in terms of make moves or at least announce some sort of big change. And then they did this, and generally it, was something, but I don't view it as anything particularly special. I mean, maybe I'm just being a cynic with this team. Maybe I'm just kind of down on the team at this point, but it wasn't like they sent another name out to get Philip Tomasino. This is straight up a reclamation project and doesn't show signs of the rebuild process, quote unquote, if you will. It doesn't show signs of it doesn't show signs of the rebuild process, but it also doesn't show signs of this dude's going to come in and play quite a bit and help a lot. Mm-hmm. It is more of someone needed to take this guy off Nashville's hands, and Pittsburgh seemed like a place to do it.
Yeah, it's a change of scenery, throw something at the wall, see if it sticks. Because if it does, he is only 23 years old, and he did have pretty high upside coming into the National Hockey League after he was drafted. Like I mentioned, first-round pick, similar to what you saw out of Cody Glass, similar to what you've seen out of a couple of other, acquisitions from the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, yes, Jarry fits under that as well. But when you look at Tomasino on the surface, he struggled to stay in the lineup in Nashville this season. And this was a year that it seemed like Barry Trotz was saying sink or float, similar to what we've seen with Sam Poulin, who we've got here. We'll talk about here in a second. But he wasn't going to send him back down to the Milwaukee Admirals of the AHL, which is where he was half the year last year, half the year prior. He was bouncing back and forth between the NHL and the AHL. This year, they simply said, if you're not in the lineup, you're just going to be a healthy scratch, and we're going to carry you as such until we can find a new home for you. And that home just happened to be Pittsburgh. 1 assist in 11 games played this year, averaging around 11 minutes of ice time. I mean, this is a guy that's going to come in, and again, it's Kyle Dubas saying, we'll see if it works. If it does, great. We have a 23-year-old that we can re-sign at the end of the season, and we can have him moving forward to help this team kind of transition. And if not, he's going to wash his hands of it and say, well, it stinks. We lost a fourth-round pick, but at the end of the day, it's a fourth-round pick that we had in our grasp for 4 months, 5 months at most. So, it's a risk. It's a hope, which I feel like we're getting a lot of from Kyle Dubas when it comes to addressing the NHL needs of this organization is let's do something and hope it works out versus knowing that it'll work out. And you can never know 100%, but it feels like this is a lot of maybe it will, and maybe we'll try to.
I feel like it's not a risk. I'll at least say that. There's no risk involved here because, like I said,
low risk.
Yeah, it's a low risk because he's still very cheap. It's not like he's going to cost a ton against the cap. Mm-hmm. If you need to fly him through waivers to send him back to the AHL again, so be it. I mean, like I said, he hasn't played a ton at the NHL level since he got into the NHL. His rookie season, he had 76 games. if I'm doing quick math correctly, he's barely reached 76 in the 3 years since. So, the expectations aren't extremely high, so that's what makes it pretty low risk, but high reward if things pan out, if he becomes a decent piece to the lineup and maybe does something next season, or if the Penguins decide to keep him around. He's in the last year of his deal, right? I have not looked.
He is. Yeah, he signed a 1-year deal just before the season started.
Yeah, okay. So I haven't looked super deep into this trade, but overall, it seems like a very, very, very low risk move for the Penguins that if it pays off, it pays off. If it doesn't, there's nothing hurt here. So at least it's got that going for it.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh Penguins practice a little bit later today. They have one more game before the holiday break on Wednesday against the Vancouver Canucks. The question is, where does he fit in this lineup? I mean, last night at practice, it was Raquel, Crosby, Rust on the first line, Bunting, Gino, Beauvillier on the second line, O'Connor, Hayes, and Puustinen on the third line, and then Nieto, Acciari, Puljujarvi as your fourth line, according to Matt Vensel. So where do you place him if you do place him in the lineup as soon as he arrives in Pittsburgh?
I mean, I'd give him a shot right away just to sort of see what he can bring to this lineup, because this lineup has nothing to lose. There's no real wrong move you can make with this lineup anymore. There's no real right move you can make with this lineup anymore either, which is the weird part. I'd say maybe you stick him in for Matt Nieto, give him some time, see if he meshes with the organization and with this lineup at all. I just, mostly because I don't know where else he would go. You have injuries. You have guys coming back from injuries still. You have, young guys that are trying to fight for roles in the lineup. And if he doesn't stay long-term, he doesn't stay long-term in this lineup. I'd say for now, give him a shot at Nieto's spot, healthy scratch Nieto, and win/if that doesn't work, a quick swap out and we continue.
Yeah, I wish that was the case, but I think we all know that it's Valtteri Puustinen who's once again probably going to eat a healthy scratch. I think, we've seen long enough that guys like Nieto aren't going to come out of the lineup, whether or not they should, which I agree with you. If I was building the roster, I'd say, okay, bump Nieto down, and that's the roster spot, and then you move the lines around as needed, because I know that Tomasino can play all three forward positions, but primarily has been at right wing during his NHL career. But it's going to be Puustinen. That's just the way of the world. That's the way Mike Sullivan views it, and that's the way that we can all assume that he's going to view this. Is Valtteri Puustinen is going to eat another healthy scratch, because that's kind of the role that he's had this season. Is whether or not he's in a handful of games that he's played. If he's not, he's probably going to be healthy scratched, and most of the time that's been the case for Puustinen. And it feels like Tomasino is just going to come in and take that spot from him again.
Which in Puustinen's part is such a shame. They talked him up so much last season, and he played really well last season. I don't know what I'm missing. I mean, aside from the fact that Nieto came back from injury, I don't know what I'm missing that Puustinen needs to keep coming out of this lineup.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have a great training camp, but you would think that you'd still want to get his feet moving as a young player that seemed to work in your roster, in your lineup last year, because how many of these guys have come up and it seemed like the Penguins have said, well, they're not ready yet. We've seen it on multiple occasions from Sam Poulin. We saw it from Vasily Ponomarev, got his cup of coffee. We saw it from Jonathan Gruden, who got his cup of coffee. None of them have worked to the level that Valtteri Puustinen did late last season. Now, part of that might be it was late last season, and once the trade deadline passed, they didn't really think that it was going to be a playoff run, but it turned into one, and Puustinen was playing well. So you would think that they'd want to transfer that over to this season, and even though he got a slow start in preseason, say, all right, well, he's going to pick things up, because that's what ended up happening last year. But he ends up sitting, and I think that leads to a larger discussion on how the Penguins have treated and viewed their prospects, or these young guys that are right on the bubble or close to becoming NHL ready. And that leads us to a conversation about Sam Poulin. Because to make room for Philip Tomasino, Sam Poulin was the one who was sent back to Wilkes-Barre Scranton. In his first stint this season with the team, 6 games played, 1 assist, the lowest ice time on the team in 2 of his 6 games, and the only players that he was higher than in the other 4 were Valtteri Puustinen and Vasily Ponomarev. So not a lot of ice time for these young guys. Kyle Dubas said last week, and we talked about it on the show, that he wants more opportunity for young players at the NHL level. Do you like how these opportunities are coming for guys like Poulin, guys like Puustinen, guys like Ponomarev this season? Or do you think that there's a lot left to be desired in that category?
So much left to be desired. You say you want to see these guys get more opportunities at the NHL level and then don't give them to them. Maybe I'm just in a bad mood this morning, but I feel like I'm bashing my head into a wall trying to talk about the Penguins right now. It's the way like he'll come out and say something like that and then play Sam Poulin for an average of 10 minutes a night, and obviously under that in the last few instances. Maybe it's just not working out for Sam Poulin in the Penguins organization, and honestly, maybe that's just okay for the Penguins and to understand that it's just not going to work for him. A new situation might be better off, but when it comes to the outside, the other guys, Valtteri Puustinen, I mean, they're not giving him, at least in my opinion, the proper looks. Coming into the year, we thought, or at least you thought, that Jack St. Ivany was going to be given a pretty good push. And he's gotten his playing time. He's gotten in some games. But I looked at the additions that they made on the defense and thought he's just going to get pushed right out again. And as it turns out, like I said, he's earned his spots, but the only youngster, quote unquote youngster, that is really getting the proper push here, I mean, Drew O'Connor's earned his role. He's in there and he's going to stay there. It's Jesse Puljujarvi, and it's because he's earning it. I mean, he's doing good in getting to that role, but I feel like at the same time, once everyone returns to health, the Penguins will not hesitate to strip him right out of the lineup for whatever reason, because like I said, there's still a Cody Glass needs to come back. Not Ponomarev, but Tomasino still needs to arrive, and Blake Lizotte still needs to return from injury. And where does that leave the young guys? All of a sudden, we have this glutton of veterans again to shove in the lineup over these young kids that, as much as they say they want to give them shots at the NHL level, they're just straight up not doing it.
Yeah.
Up and down the organization. It's not just Sullivan, it is Dubas as well. And again, none of this is on Dubas necessarily. He's trying to build a team to win this year. Or at least that's what he was trying to do earlier in the offseason. Now it is time to shed the veteran weight and give the kids a chance, except until he does that, the younger ones are not getting in the lineup. Yeah,
moving out Vasily Ponomarev in lieu of a line of Nola Chari, Kevin Hayes, and Matt Nieto. That doesn't scream, I really want opportunity for young players. And again, I understand it. Only so many roster spots, and a lot of these veterans cannot be sent down, or you just do not want to send them down because that's poor asset management. But it feels like when these guys are getting their opportunities, the Ponomarevs, the Poulins, I don't like how they're coming. They have extremely short leashes. If they make one mistake, they're benched for a period or benched for the rest of the game. And if they have one bad game, they end up getting sent down. Right? Sam Poulin, before that one game on Saturday where he struggled mightily, it's not like he was lighting the world on fire, but he wasn't performing poorly, right? That line was something that we were talking about as, hey, that's a small bright spot for the Penguins right now, is the POP line, and Poulin was part of it. And his underlying numbers were great, and he had one assist, and sure, he wasn't getting the opportunities for himself, but he was helping create because that whole line as a unit worked well together. But he had one bad game, and all of a sudden it's, well, we're going to trade for Phil Tomasino, and you're going to get sent back down to the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. And again, maybe that's a bad example because Sam Poulin wasn't lighting the world on fire, but Jonathan Gruden was very good for the Penguins when he played last year. He hasn't gotten a second of NHL ice time this season. Valtteri Puustinen, we already talked about. It feels like you're going to start forcing these young players when they do get in there to play tight, because they know if I don't make an impact in this 9 minutes, I'm not going to get another opportunity for a couple of months. So that's never going to allow them to grow in the right way. I just don't think that this is the proper way, especially for a team right now who is shifting. And we'll have that conversation of, hey, what is the direction of this organization right now? But this team, in my eyes, little preview, is shifting towards the future. And the way that they're handling young guys, it's going to look like a very, very dark future for the Pittsburgh Penguins because they're not giving them the proper opportunities. Even when they get them, they're told, hey, you have 9 minutes. If you make a mistake, that time is going to go lower. And if you make too many mistakes, if you make a couple more mistakes, you're going to be sent down and you're not going to get another shot at another game. You're not going to get a chance to bounce back. So no, I don't like the way that they've handled the young players this season. I don't like the way that they've handled their opportunities this season. And you could probably extend that back with Mike Sullivan. I know he has this stigma of not letting the young kids play, but this year, when you've outwardly said you're going to try to get the young kids opportunities, it's maintained and even gotten worse in some situations. And I think that's just a bad way for the organization, who is heading towards that time, right? They're heading towards that time to start acting and continue to act.
Yeah, and with the young players, it's been, they need to earn their right to play, which Puljujarvi has done. I think Owen Pickering, for the most part, has started to do that, which is a really good thing to see.
Yeah.
It's different on the defense because, boy, the defense is a gong show at the moment.
I mean, so is the offense, though. Like, we can't sit here and say that the offense has been a unit that's tough to crack. And here's the thing. Yeah, those kids need to earn their opportunity. But at the same time, that's what you talk about when you have a contending team. This team sucks, right? This team sucks. So you know what? Give them their opportunities, find out what you have in them, and move on. That's what you need to do. You need to give them actual chances to show what they can be at this level, not 10 minutes for 2 games and saying, all right, well, Ponomarev didn't pan out. We're going to send him back. We'll try again in 3 months. Like, you're never going to learn anything. You're never going to answer any questions about any of these players by only giving them that short of an opportunity. And I understand you want to still compete, but you're not. Yeah. You're not competing. You suck. So give these kids opportunities, and maybe somebody will surprise you. Maybe
it just in the way that Joel Blomqvist did. He surprised a lot of people. The issue is that the team is so bad in front of him. Yeah, you're going to ruin his trajectory if you keep him up. That's kind of how that's turned into. So I think he was sent back, rightfully so, because he still is just a 23-year-old netminder who can use one last touch of seasoning at the AHL level, especially while the team is doing nothing in front of him. You can't just sewer his progression that early, especially if he's supposed to be the goalie of the future.
That, and they just don't have the ice time for him.
That too. And
you got $8 million in goaltenders sitting in front of him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, he earned a starting spot whenever he was here because because Tristan Jarry was in the minors or Alex Nedeljkovic was injured. It was the struggles of the goalies in front of him that made him show up and prove what he can do. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, now you got those guys back, and you allegedly don't plan on moving either of them yet. It's a tough spot for Blomqvist to be in, but I think right now at this moment, because the skaters in front of him are terrible, or at least playing terribly, you don't get him at the NHL and then ruin what the NHL could be for him.
Yeah, I think playing time plays more of a factor into that than anything else. I do think that is also something to take into account, the fact that the defense in front of him is god-awful, but I think it's more so playing time because you can't get him the playing time that he needs to be able to progress whenever Tristan Jarry needs to get starts, whenever Alex Nedeljkovic needs to get starts, and you need both of those guys playing because you need them to hopefully turn a corner at least a little bit to try to offload one of them, and Tristan Jarry is so far behind that line that it's hard to imagine that he's going to reach it. But Alex Nedeljkovic, if he does what he did last year, might be interesting to a team. What he's doing this year, I don't think he'd be interested to AHL teams the way that he's performed. But it's not all in the goaltending. It's not all in the defense. It's on the forwards and the goal scoring as well, and we'll get to that next. Let's discuss really a porous month when it comes to the offensive side of the puck. Most things are not working for the Penguins, right? We even talked a little bit via text that, okay, the penalty kill is not even working anymore. And that's been a top 10 unit for the past 3 years. When they've been at their worst, at least their penalty kill has been good. That's even gone out the window. But scoring has disappeared completely. Through November, the Penguins are 30th in goals per game played with 2.09. If you look back to even October, they were 20th. So that's dropping 10 spots with 2.92. So instead of averaging 3 goals per game, they're averaging 2 goals per game. And that October figure is including 2 shutouts. They were shut out by the Oilers. They were shut out by the Rangers. And they still finished with 2.92 goals per game, which is way more than what they have in November. If you look at 5-on-5 goals, in November, they have 15. In October, they had 24. In November, they have 8 players who have scored at 5-on-5 this month. In November, they were up at 12. So the offense has completely dissipated. You look at last weekend as an example, 1 goal in each of those games played, and then giving up 4 on Friday, 6 on Saturday. What has happened to the Penguins offensively this month?
Who knows? Who really knows? This is genuinely one thing that no one's going to have a real good answer for unless you dive into the analytics and watch each and every skater each and every night in terms of how they're all performing. Because even Sidney Crosby isn't finding the back of the net enough. Even Evgeni Malkin has gone pretty stale recently. I mean, Rickard Rakell has done okay, but I feel like he's sort of dried up in this last month as well. This is a fascinating team. I mean, the fact that Anthony Beauvillier still has 6 goals and is among the team leaders, not the top, but up there with Crosby and Rakell. I could not come up with a good answer as to what is going on with this offense. It's not scoring. They're not finding the back of the net. It almost seems as simple as that, but also, are they shooting enough? Are they even getting their chances enough? Is it as simple as, man, they just need to shoot more?
Well, for Friday and Saturday, the one glaring issue was nobody was getting to the front of the net. Nobody was getting into the front of the net. But a more overarching problem is, one, some players had to regress to the mean, right? I mean, Lars Eller was scoring at a tremendous clip in October. He's not on the team anymore, but even in early November, that regressed. Kevin Hayes was scoring on a tremendous clip when it comes to shooting percentage. Rickard Rakell early in the season was scoring at a tremendous clip, but that all had to regress to the mean at some point. You would hope at that point that other players would step up that were struggling, and one player has. Michael Bunting was bad in October, has been great in November, but that's it. Everybody else has gone in the opposite direction. So there's a lot of individual cold streaks that the Penguins have on their team right now. You mentioned Malkin. He has 2 goals in his last 13 games played. That's going to lead to some struggles. Rickard Rakell has 1 in his last 9, so he has disappeared almost entirely, except for that 1 goal he scored against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Kris Letang has 0 goals. I get he's a defenseman. 0 goals in his last 17 games played, and that's taking out the fact that he hasn't played in some of the games as well. So 0 goals in probably the Penguins' last 20-plus games played. Erik Karlsson has 1 in his last 21. You get the picture. There's only one player that has consistently put up points, and that's Sidney Crosby, and consistently put up goals, which is Sidney Crosby. It's not a goal every game, but it's more consistent than some of these guys. So you put all that together, regression to the mean for some of your bottom 6 guys who have not contributed in November like they did in October. The power play has been okay. It's kind of leveled off around 16th this month in the NHL, which is, if not for that, they'd be in deep trouble. But the 5-on-5 scoring is absolutely gone. I mean, this is the most lifeless this team has looked in all 3 phases, but definitely in the offensive zone since I can remember. Even last year's pre-deadline crash, where we were saying, man, this is bad. They don't look like they care at all. And it led to the trading of Jake Gensel at the deadline. In 14 games, they had 2.5 goals per game. So they were so bad at 2.5 goals per game that they traded away a 40-goal scorer. What are they going to do now whenever in the entire month of November, they're at 2.09? It's bad. It's really bad. The offense has completely dissipated for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it's leading to loss after loss after loss. And it's leading to performances where you look at it and you say, they never really had a shot. There might have been 5 minutes of that game where it felt like they actually had a chance to maybe make something of that night, maybe get a point in the standings, maybe get the win, for God's sakes. But the offense, it gives you no hope that it's going to come out there and be able to beat some of the best teams in the league, especially whenever the defense and the goaltending has been what it has been this season.
No kidding. I mean, when it comes to the defense and the goal, you gave up 6 to Utah. I mean, I get that they're a better team than they were in Arizona. They are they're a whole new organization, whole new franchise. It's the same players though, mostly. And again, new mindset, and they're improving, but they're still not the greatest team in the league yet. And you gave up 6 to them and then only scored 1 on their backup, who would be a third string in most teams, maybe a second. Malkin's not bad.
He'd be a first stringer here if Blomqvist
No
is still in the A.
No kidding. It's tough, but you're giving up a ton of goals and you're not scoring any. It's like I said, maybe I am just in a bad mood this morning, but I'm bashing my head into a wall trying to talk about this team. Mm-hmm. Happy holiday weekend, everybody.
Yeah, and here's the biggest issue. The offense kept them alive early this season. The fact that they were able to go out there and put up goals was the reason that they were able to cover up some of those defensive deficiencies, some of those goaltending issues, but not anymore. And guess what that's led to? A 4-10-4 record in their last 18 games played. That's awful. That's awful. And that leads to another question that we're going to answer next. Let's get back into what we were talking about just there, which obviously 4-10-4 record in their last 18 games played. Where do you go from here? Because right now the Penguins are playing awful. They look like one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. The vibe around the team looks like it is absolutely horrendous. You're 15th out of 16 teams in the East. You're dead last in the Metro. And you've played more games than everybody in the Eastern Conference except for the New Jersey Devils, and that one game in hand is not going to do you much good in the standings. So where do you go from here?
Genuinely, you need to just call it a year.
You're waving the white flag?
Yeah, I know it's at this point as we record this, not technically Thanksgiving yet, but I mean, at the quarter point of the season is where a lot of teams kind of draw their line in the sand and say, this is the kind of team we're going to be this year. This is the direction we're going in. The Penguins have not outwardly said what direction they are going in this year. I think a lot of us can say the writing is on the wall, but at the same time, it's a little tough to say that whenever A, they haven't outwardly said it, and B, when you look at the lineup, I mean, there's the star players are still here. There still seems to be some veteran talent in the lineup that on paper should do something. I think we all came into this season thinking this lineup is better. They've all performed worse. It's an extremely tough watch these days too. So the direction you go in, where this team goes from here, is essentially wave the white flag on this year. I think we had this discussion with Hunter last week. You might be able to salvage something next year. If you can it this year, you have a ton of cap space opening up, and you just try and sway a star or two to come, and maybe you make certain trades, maybe you elevate certain areas of the lineup, and then you go for it next year as the true final last dance. Mm-hmm. But this year, it just doesn't seem like there's they have, like I said, they might not say a direction that they're going in, but probably won't. But it certainly, from at least my perspective and your perspective, doesn't look like it's going anywhere this year at all.
Yeah. The way that they've performed through 23 games, it's hard to imagine that they are going to reverse course so drastically and become a team that can fight into a playoff spot. And I understand, points-wise, they're not far off of a playoff spot. Performance-wise, they are extremely far off of a playoff spot. But I do want to push back on one thing you said there. You said, yeah, I mean, maybe, you wave the white flag on this season. Next year, you have the cap space. Maybe you sway a star. What star wants to come to this sinking ship right now? Like, I understand. To some extent, Sidney Crosby is a draw. But any star in their right mind is not going to say, hey, I'm going to come for that last dance, that one season, and then be done. Because most of these guys don't want one-year contracts. And the Penguins aren't going to give out an 8-year contract to a 28 or 27-year-old, especially because I don't think they have the power and this position to where star players are going to want to come to Pittsburgh anymore. I think they're going to see the writing on the wall, just as you do, just as I do, and say, this is not a contending team anymore. If I want to contend, Pittsburgh is not it. If I want a long contract, Pittsburgh is likely not it. I think there's only going to be 2 or 3 players that fit the mold that Pittsburgh would want to give that long contract to. And I don't think those players want to come to Pittsburgh anymore. So as nice as it would be to say, hey, everybody's going to want to come for the last dance of Malkin and Crosby together, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
Yeah, and I don't fully believe it either. Maybe instead of a signing, it's a trade of sort. Maybe it would have to be. It would have to be a trade. And not only that, it isn't impossible to convince like I said, maybe a star to convince them, hey, you're coming in for the last dance of Crosby and Malkin. You'll play with Crosby for a couple seasons. Maybe he'll sign another new deal. You never know what Crosby's future will hold. He's, at least so far, still proving he can still cut it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the right sort of player that you can convince and say, this will be your team, or you'll be part of a big push, because part of Kyle Dubas' plan is to build for the future, is to have a winning team after this era. Tell them, hey, you can be a part of the winning team that we're building here. Here are the young prospects. Yeah. Here are some of the expectations. Here are our high draft picks this year, possibly top 5. And then you have a future to be with. So maybe you can sway someone. Again, it's a tough sell.
Yeah.
It isn't easy. You do have to think of who Kyle Dubas has worked with before. Perhaps Mitch Marner doesn't sign an extension this season, and now I'm getting into fantasy land. But,
yeah. Well, we started from a place of fantasy land thinking a star is going to want to sign in Pittsburgh, but I get what you're saying. There is a non-zero chance that they can sway somebody worth their weight in salary cap space to come to Pittsburgh and help turn this team around. They did it with Erik Karlsson, but that's the other part of it. It has to work out.
Yeah.
You cannot miss, because when you do, we're a year and a quarter into what it happens when you swing and miss. When you swing for the fences, you connect, and you end up on the warning track, and it gets caught by a left fielder. That's where you're at right now. You got nothing, even though you had a mighty swing. You made great connection, and it just didn't work out for anything. So that's a difficult position for the Penguins, because, as you mentioned, they have not committed to a direction. We've, in this segment, kind of committed to a direction for them, but that doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. But would you, if you were Dubas, or at what point, because you said that you would try to go for it next year, at what point do you cut cord and jump fully into a rebuild?
That's it. That's so tough, because it's always the fact that the stars are still here. I mean, Crosby's not going anywhere. Malkin, you don't need to send anywhere. He's got a year left after this one.
Malkin's not going anywhere,
so he doesn't have to go anywhere. He's not going anywhere. Letang's the interesting one. He always has seemed like the most likely to be moved if it came to that situation. Maybe you see if he wants to go to Montreal and call it up there. It's if you're Dubas, I mean, we've seen rebuilds go pretty quickly before. I mean, New York announced their rebuild, and then 2 weeks later we're a Stanley Cup contender. Again, I'm not saying the Penguins are going to be that quick, but you never know. Anything is possible. If you're committing to it and outwardly committing to it and saying to the people you're committing to it, then maybe at least there would be a sense of ease in the fan base, like a sense of, okay, thank you for letting us know what's going on publicly. I think me and you can, kind of say ourselves what we think is going on. But a lot of the people, I mean, the Penguins have a smart fan base. A lot of them are kind of dense as well. So they need to be told that that's the direction they're going in. And whenever I say a lot of the fan base, I'm talking about a specific crowd, and I think we all know that crowd.
Yeah, and even that part, I don't know. Like, I feel like that part is they're just super hopeful because they can't believe that this is what they're seeing, which is fair. Because I don't think I ever expected the Penguins to be this bad with Sidney Crosby.
Exactly. And
still performing at that level, not just Sidney Crosby in general. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then when it comes to, like, everyone's going to be wondering what's going on with this team. When you're sitting around your Thanksgiving table this week and your family is asking you, so what's going on with the Penguins? What is going on with your team? You can just try and tell them, hey, like, they're just not officially saying what's going on, which is they're cutting it to the, not cutting it to the bolts, but certainly not going for it this year, it seems. Maybe they try and revamp for next year, but at this moment, they're not going to publicly say it until they do. Until they do, they're not going to publicly say it, but this is it. This is the time of tear down, time of rebuild, time of reset even. And it's not going to be pretty, but I think at this point, if anyone has watched enough games in November, we should all be used to this now.
They're at an inflection point right now in the organization because the team as it stands right now is not good enough to do anything. Yep. So you can either commit to the rebuild and go in that direction, or you can put your foot in the ground and say, this team needs a lot of help. I'm going to give them a lot of help because I believe that they deserve one more run. That's going to cost, because all the moves that you could have made that were a little bit cheaper, that could have been kind of decisive moves that you don't have to pay too much, but it helps the team now. Those moves haven't worked out. They haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cody Glass has been fine, but he's also been injured. And even when he's been fine, he hasn't scored a goal. And as much as I like what I've seen from Cody Glass, he hasn't scored a goal at all. That's a problem. So you're at an inflection point. And if you choose to stay here, and if you choose to hold down Pat, like Kyle Dubas did last year, which I don't think he will do. Last year, he was very, very patient with this team, but they were also playing better at points than they are now. But if you hold Pat, you're putting your team in purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, they are a bad team that thinks they might be a good team eventually in the short term that really doesn't look like they can. So right now, your coach is desperate to find any combos that work. Your team can't defend. The offense is dwindling, like we mentioned, and the goaltending is extremely volatile, with negative results being the majority of what you're getting out of those goaltenders.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad team.
Yeah.
You're at an inflection point. Either sell and know that it's a bad team, or you're going to have to pay a premium to try to get this team to turn around, because what I see on the ice right now is not going to get it done.
Nope. And also, whenever you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, just know that Mike Sullivan's not getting fired, period. Sorry to break that one to you. This also isn't necessarily Kyle Dubas' fault. I mean, he made the moves he thought would be positive for the team in the short term. I know a lot of people want to throw blame at Kyle Dubas. In fairness, it's okay to do that, but that doesn't mean you need to call for his job either. He was making the moves he thought were going to help the team in the short term, as well as create that big, long future that everyone is hoping for, and that he is probably at this point mostly hoping for, rather than looking for this year.
Yeah.
Everyone knew when Kyle Dubas got here, by the way, he was jumping aboard the sinking Titanic. Everybody knew that. Yeah. And seeing a lot of tweets these days of, why is Kyle Dubas making this move, that move, this, that, the other? Because he has been trying to build the winning team now. That has been part of his duty. And things just haven't worked out. Again, we went into this season saying this looks like a better roster, could be a fringe playoff team. Turns out we were just wrong about that, and so was Dubas, and that happens. That doesn't mean this is all his fault.
Well, here's the thing with Dubas, and I've stated this before, and then we'll close on this here. He did have an impossible task when he joined the Penguins. You have to make this team a contender, at the very least, make them a playoff team again, to where they can go on one last run. But you also have to kickstart this rebuild. So you have to have one foot in either camp. That is a very hard place to be for an NHL general manager. So I think that you're grading him on a curve based on that, and based on the fact that you can't ignore that Ron Hextall put this team in an awful position by the time that he left. But at the same time, while I'm grading on that curve, I do have the knowledge that Kyle Dubas knew what he was getting himself into. That Kyle Dubas knew exactly how difficult this task was going to be. And while he has succeeded, I think, as far as the rebuilding aspect, I've liked the draft picks that he has selected. I've liked the fact that he's acquired more picks. I like the fact that he's brought in guys like Ponomarev and Koivunen. And like I mentioned, the draft picks. I love Harrison Brunick. I love that selection. I love Tanner Howe. I like everything he's done when it points to the future. He has missed on almost every occasion when it comes to helping this team now. And that you can be harsh about, but understand that his position is not an easy one. And I think there are some very good, very important positives to be taken from his time so far with the Penguins, but it's mostly been in the moves that he's made for the future of the organization. Moves that we won't know if they pay off for 3 or 4 years, which is unfortunate when you have guys like Crosby still performing at that level. Guys like Malkin, who for the most part, under Dubas, has performed at that level. So it's a tough spot to be in. It's obviously a spot that I don't begrudge anybody for being mad at him, but I think you do have to understand that his spot in particular is a little bit more gray than what is black and white with Mike Sullivan. And that's why I think if you're going to direct your ire, you have to direct your ire at the guy that has yet to change through 23 games when the Penguins are one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. But do you have anything else to say?
Nope. I agree with you on that. Absolutely. It's Kyle Dubas knew he was coming aboard a sinking ship.
Yep.
And, he just so happened to have missed on everything that was in an attempt to build the team now. Just an incredibly bad batting average, you'd think. It's,
maybe Michael Bunting.
Yeah, but at the same time,
again,
what does the season hold for him now?
Yeah, exactly. And then you look at, you could just make that comparison of the biggest names that were brought in. Michael Bunting, we'll put that in the positive category.
Sure.
Erik Karlsson, Tristan, Jarry, Ryan Graves, Matt Grizz. Okay, I don't think we need to keep going down the tally. That's the low batting average. But again, I'll say look at the moves that he made for the future. He still has to pull through. He has to execute that. The players need to develop. You need to utilize those draft picks that you've accrued for the next 3 drafts in a smart way, in an effective way to help the team. But as of right now, that's where I stand on Kyle Dubas. And I think that, as far as where the team goes from here, they're not going to tell us, but I feel like it's only going to go further down unless something happens, unless a direction is committed to in the public eye, which we haven't seen. And I'm not sure when we're going to see it because there's no indication that they're going to do it. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.